So we went to get the MRI. Immediately, they sent us back to our doctor. My wife Teresa told me that at that moment she knew that it was not good. I'm clueless, didn't register to me at all that it was weird that we're going straight back to the doctor. So by the time we get back to our family physician, the office is closed, and his nurse takes us right back into the same room we were before. And we sat down, and he said, "It's bad news. It's a brain tumor."
Will my adopted child be okay? What will their future look like? Where did I go wrong? Hi, neighbor. I'm Tim, an adoptive parent and adoption mentor. If you're a struggling adoptive parent searching for answers in your parenting journey, you're in the right place. I teach Christian adoptive parents how to be okay, even if their kids aren't, by anchoring them in biblical principles. Anchors of hope and healing are on the way. Hi, neighbor. Today's episode is a little different than what you're used to hearing here. Like episode 16, this is a t-shirt story, where something ordinary ends up carrying extraordinary meaning. But while episode 16 focused on a natural disaster, today's story is deeply personal. It's about a young girl and her battle with cancer, and a perspective that far exceeded her years. Joining me today is my neighbor and brother, Simon Harris. He's going to share a story that has inspired my family and me, and I believe it will inspire you too. Simon, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Tim. Good to be with you this morning.
Yeah, this is something we are 18 years removed from this story when it first happened. I mean, I've known you probably for 20, 22 years, I guess.
Something like that, yeah.
I think so, kind of dating ourselves. But this story about your daughter, Kelsey, is something I wanted my audience to hear and to reflect upon how she met the challenges in her life, and how we can use that same mindset to meet our challenges and the storms we go through. The tagline for this podcast is how to be okay even if your kids aren't. A lot of times our adopted children are not okay emotionally, and we aren't okay emotionally either. But your daughter had a perspective that to this day blows me away. And I just would like for you to jump right in and share this story and how it all took place.
All right, if we were kind of to start at the beginning, I think the first thing that I would tell you is that even as a little girl, a 5-year-old little girl, Kelsey was always excited about the small things. We didn't have a lot of money back in those days, and who did, right? And so one of our favorite things to do was to go to the library. New Albany, Indiana is where we lived. Outside of New Albany, Indiana, had a great library, and we would go there. And sometimes on the way home, we might stop for a little treat at McDonald's. And you could tell Kelsey in the morning, "Hey, we're going to go to the library and go to McDonald's today." And she'd be like, "Oh, this is just so great!" And she would just be so happy about those little small things. And really, there are many other instances where that was true as well. We moved to Arkansas, Jonesboro, Arkansas in 2006. And I remember very vividly, it was Super Bowl Sunday. And Kelsey and I were walking into the church building before services began. I was going to set up my computer and things like that. Kelsey was walking with me arm in arm, and she stepped out of her shoe and didn't even realize that she stepped out of her shoe. At that moment, I just thought she was just being silly and didn't think anything of it. "Hey, girl, get your shoe. Let's keep doing this." Well, that night we went to some friend's house for a Super Bowl party. Kelsey could not walk down the stairs. Like her left leg just wasn't working very well. And then when she was sitting in a chair, she went to stand up, and she couldn't stand up. And let me say that I should have went back and said a few days prior to that, and don't ask me why I remember this, but I remember it was a Thursday. She said, My hand kind of feels numb, like it's sleepy. And again, didn't think anything of that. But now she's got this hand that feels a little numb, and her foot isn't, and it was her left leg not working very well. I thought that she might have a pinched nerve or something like that. So I go to the chiropractor, and so I took her to my chiropractor, and he examined her and said, "No, this is not a pinched nerve. This is not spinal. This is something cranial." He encouraged us to get an appointment with our family physician. And so we did later in the day. He did some, test pulling and all that kind of stuff and pushing on her. And he thought it was something called maybe transference syndrome, where you are maybe under some stress and it manifests itself in a physical way. And again, I can remember saying to the doctor, no, that's not Kelsey at all. That's just, she's not an anxious kid. She's not a depressed kid, so that's not it. And he said, well, let's go get an MRI just to be on the safe side. So we went to get the MRI. Immediately, they sent us back to our doctor. My wife Teresa told me that at that moment she knew that it was not good. I'm clueless, didn't register to me at all that it was weird that we're going straight back to the doctor. So by the time we get back to our family physician, the office is closed, and his nurse takes us right back into the same room we were before. And we sat down, and he said, "It's bad news. It's a brain tumor." Since then, I've had some people say, "Oh man, that sounds brutal." But it's like, what? How do you tell somebody their kid has a brain tumor? I appreciated his straightforwardness. Now, I'll tell you that, I mean, immediately my wife and I gasped and we're beside ourselves. And you know what Kelsey's doing? She's saying, "It's okay, Daddy. It's okay. It's going to be okay, Daddy." That's what she's saying. In the time that we had the MRI to getting back to the doctor's office, which was a 5-minute drive, our doctor, his name was Jeffrey Barber, had already been in contact with St. Jude. And we're living in Jonesboro, Arkansas, which is about 70 miles west of Memphis, where St. Jude is located. And he's already found that there is a study going on for Kelsey's kind of tumor. The really long name for her tumor was a pontine glioblastoma multiforme. And many people have heard of the idea of a blastoma and even a glioblastoma. Multiforme means that it was made up of really two different kinds of cells. You can think of it like this: part of it was grade 2, part of it was grade 4. But the thing that made this bad was it's in her pons. Again, before this, I never knew what a pons was. So when your spinal cord comes up and it meets your brain, it spreads out. Imagine like a phone, a big trunk phone cable, then splitting off into all the different phone lines. And so that tumor was in that mess of wires, if you will. And that's what made this tumor so bad. Within a week, we are in a brain surgeon's office in Memphis, Tennessee. He and his partner were the two of the world leading juvenile brain surgeons. And so Kelsey had surgery. At that point, we did not know how bad it was, really. It's very possible that it could have been a grade 2, but after surgery, we found out it was a grade 4 tumor, and which means that at that point, Kelsey has a life expectancy of about 9 to 12 months. So once again, we immediately become St. Jude patients. After that, the surgery was not in St. Jude itself. It's in another local hospital there in Memphis called Le Bonheur. But Kelsey's transferred to St. Jude and immediately begins undergoing some experimental chemo and radiation. If your listeners have ever had any doubt about supporting St. Jude, let me just tell you that that is a great organization to support.
Hmm.
They really treat the kids and the family I mean, once you become a St. Jude patient, you don't have any medical bills for your children anymore. Kelsey had a sinus infection. They paid for Sudafed. We would come over for the day. They'll pay for your gas, and they pay for one parent and one child to get lunch. Again, just above and beyond. In the St. Jude organization, there are these employees. They're called child life specialists, and their job is to be a liaison between the kids, the doctors, and the nurses. And one of the things that they would do even is just keep the kids busy while they're waiting for their appointments. Because, man, sometimes you can wait 5 or 6 hours, but man, you're going to go see the greatest people in the world with the latest technology. So waiting 4 hours for that, big deal, right? And
Hmm.
it's free. And so one day, there was one lady, her name was Amy. She was in the radiation department. She and Kelsey are just giggling and laughing and being silly. And Amy says to Kelsey, she says, Kelsey, I love it when you come in here because you're just always so happy. And out of nowhere, Kelsey says, well, life is more interesting when you're happy. And that just kind of rolled off her tongue. I mean, I had never heard her say that before, but it was like, wow, that is great. And so I literally pulled out a piece of scrap paper and I wrote down, life is more interesting when you're happy. That was her life's philosophy, I think, even way before we ever got to St. Jude. But that philosophy coming out of her, and I would see that again and again. There's one day we were walking arm in arm through St. Jude, and I asked her, I said, have you ever thought about the fact that you're a patient at St. Jude, one of the world's leading cancer hospitals? She said, Daddy, I ain't got time for that. She's much more interested in just in enjoying life, whatever she has left. And kind of where you come into this picture. So in October of that year, so that all of that that I just said, most of that was in from February of 2008. Kelsey was diagnosed February 4th, 2008. We became St. Jude patient in by I think by February 21st or something, right around there. And so in October, we're at a camp out for homeschoolers that you and I both attended. And I had the opportunity to teach the men's Bible class. And I just wanted to talk to us about kind of seizing the day, enjoying life with our family, overcoming these challenges that we have, and not let the challenges bring us down. And so I used Kelsey's story and I told how Kelsey had said, here she is. She's got a brain tumor. The surgery caused her right eye not to be able to blink anymore. And so she had to have it taped. And the left side of her face, she couldn't control it. So it's kind of droopy. If you've ever seen somebody who's had a stroke, that's kind of what
Hmm.
it was like. But here she is in the midst of all of that, saying life is more interesting when you're happy. And so I told that story. And then I said off the cuff, man, that should be on a t-shirt. And what I usually say is, little did I know there was a guy out there who was in the midst of starting a t-shirt business, and he made it happen. Went behind our back, collected money from interested people in that homeschool group. And so I guess it was around Thanksgiving. You can correct me on that, but that's what is in my brain. That we got this box of t-shirts that said, life is more interesting when you're happy. And also a note that more money than was needed was raised. And so you were also able to share some of those shirts with other families dealing with cancer. And that just meant so much to us. And I think Kelsey herself was more excited about that than getting the t-shirts ourselves.
Hmm.
And so I'll tell you another story that kind of illustrates the kind of person that Kelsey was in the midst of all of this. So Kelsey found out that most patients at St. Jude are outpatients. St. Jude's own research has found that kids do better in their recovery by not having to stay in the hospital. And so even when we were there, if we were there for a week at a time, they would put us up in, there are three housing units at that time at St. Jude. One was called the Memphis Grizzly House, and that was more like a hotel. And that's where we stayed most of the time. most people are familiar with the Ronald McDonald houses at Children's Hospital.
Hmm.
And so then that one was there on campus as well. And that was for the kids who were going to be there for a little bit longer. If you're going to be there for a really long time, they would put you up in what was called the Target House, which was much more like an apartment building off campus. But so Kelsey found out there were some kids at St. Jude who would not get to go home, who wouldn't get to be with their families. And so she set about raising money. And the idea was she was going to raise money and then buy presents to put in what they would call the Santa's closet. So now the families at St. Jude, they don't have to buy Christmas gifts for their kids who are staying there. They basically walk in this Santa's closet with a quote unquote budget and then pick out presents for their kids. And so Kelsey starts raising money. And I think she raised $7,000
Oh, wow.
and went shopping and donated all that they shopped for. And she did this as a 4-H project as well, donating because she wanted those kids to have a good Christmas. And again, that's just the kind of, and again, she's in the midst of dealing with this cancer mess herself. I was really proud of her for that, really impressed by that.
You've added some details to the story that I wasn't aware of, the early diagnosis and all those things. And the one thing I do remember from that Bible class was you telling me the day you heard her say that statement, life is more interesting when you're happy. She was going through chemo at the time, right? And
And chemo and radiation. Yeah.
okay, that's not pleasant. I mean, we've all seen family members, regardless, go through that, and it's just not, it's not good. And for her to have that perspective, it's just, well, it defies her age. I mean,
Yeah.
that's very mature thinking for someone to have that perspective, especially when she's living with a death sentence, basically. I'm still floored today. You talked about the Bible class you were teaching. I don't know if you realize this or not, but those shirts were originally just supposed to be 12 shirts. That was an arbitrary number that my wife and I had come up with to justify setting our press up. And so I don't know why I just said, "Oh, I'm going to do 12 shirts." I mean, at the time, let's see, you had 4 children and you and your wife, Teresa. I don't know. I thought, well, I guess you can all just get multiple shirts. But what happened was it was interesting. Somebody in the class saw me write it down and they said, "You're doing something, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah, I'll take care of it. I just want to do it myself. This isn't about me at all. This is about Kelsey." But personally speaking, whenever somebody is going through a difficult time, I always feel helpless. I want to do something, but I don't know what to do. But as soon as you said, "I want that on a t-shirt," I said, "Oh, I can do that." And that's what I wanted to do. But then the other people in the class said, "We want to be participants in this too." So 12 shirts went to 400 immediately. That was just crazy. As you said, there were other people that received these shirts because we had other friends going through cancer at the same time. With those friends going through cancer, we were able to send them shirts. And as you said, Kelsey was more excited about those people receiving the encouragement as well. It's just, it's really neat how this all played out. Now, she was 14 when she was diagnosed. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. She was 14 when she was diagnosed.
Hmm.
Again, this is February 2nd, 2008. She turned 15 on March the 9th of that year.
Okay.
And so she lived for about 14 more months after that.
Hmm.
So she had her 16th birthday. She passed away on April the 6th of 2009. So she had her 16th birthday, and then literally 4 weeks to the day, she passed away.
I remember, I think you knew the time was approaching because you made a quick trip back to Indiana. And I remember seeing her with you at services. And at that time, she wasn't very steady. She was hanging on to daddy pretty tight. But I remember you asking her, "How many shirts have you printed so far?" And at that time, it was 800. And I said, "Oh, we've printed around 800 shirts." And I remember her, she couldn't really talk very well, but I remember her mouthing, "Wow."
Hmm.
And so again, I could tell she was encouraged and overwhelmed by something she said that she kind of took for granted, but something she said had impacted other people. But it's just something that it speaks well to her, her legacy.
Yeah.
It really
Um,
does.
there was one, I think it may have even been on that trip. Her story became well known, at least in the little circle that we're a part of.
Hmm.
So even at that homeschool camp, I mean, everybody knew her name and knew her story even before the t-shirts. But she said to me, she said, "I don't know what the big deal is. I'm just a teenager." I'm like, you can think that, honey, but no,
No,
that's not true at all. That that
no.
you are having an influence on people.
Hmm. That's the really amazing thing about this story and her story and what she said and her perspective, because I share her story all the time. And every time I share it, people get tears in their eyes.
Yeah,
And it affects people. It still affects me to this day. I mean, we are 16 years. I think we saw each other recently. We're 16 years removed from her passing.
that's correct.
And her story is still resonating with people. After she passed, I remember you and Teresa not wanting to let this fade off. You wanted to keep this movement with the t-shirts going because it had at that point we had sent several shirts to people who were dealing with cancer. So, can you describe a little bit what happened, after she passed and where this thing went?
Yeah, sure. So as you said, let me tell you this, and I think this kind of plays into it as well. At Kelsey's funeral, we asked people, "Hey, look, don't come dressed up, shirt and tie kind of a thing. If you've got what we call the Kelsey shirt, wear a Kelsey
Hmm.
shirt." And also, I think you did know this, but we actually buried Kelsey in a
Hmm.
Kelsey shirt.
That got me.
I think there were about 500 people at that funeral. 400 of them had Kelsey shirts on. And so kind of seeing that and realizing the impact that it had on us and on others. So as you said, my wife and I said, we don't want this to end. And so we created a charitable foundation called the Kelsey Wynn Harris Foundation. And for about the next 5 years, maybe, we would send T-shirts to anybody we heard that had cancer. And we would send T-shirts to their whole family. I mean, we even sent, I don't know if you remember this, but back during that time, what's the golfer's name? Phil,
Mickelson.
Phil Nicholson.
Yeah, I remember that one.
His
Hmm.
wife had breast cancer, and
Hmm.
I was able to get in touch with his agent and send 5 shirts to Phil Mickelson and his family, and
Hmm.
actually got a response back through the agent that they were really touched by the story and by the shirts. But hey, we also send them to a lot of people that nobody knows, and that was really what this was all about. So we're raising
Right.
money in order to send t-shirts to people just to brighten their day. And do you know that there were probably three or four other people who were also buried in their Kelsey shirt?
Really? Wow.
And I remember one going to a funeral of an older gentleman who died of cancer, and his wife told me, she said he's hardly been out of that shirt since you sent it. I would have to take it off
Hmm.
him to wash it, but as soon as it was clean, he wanted it back on. And in addition to that, Kelsey was a writer. That's what she wanted to be when she grew up. And so we also sponsored a small scholarship. We offer $1,000 a year for 4 years to students that had to write a essay on why life is more interesting when you're happy. And the winner
Hmm.
of that essay contest would get $1,000 a year for 4 years. And we were able to do that for 4 kids. And so 4 kids got $4,000 to help towards their college. Honestly, we didn't want this to happen, but things just kind of petered out with that, and we got to the point where we quit raising money and quit sending the shirts. The shirts that I still do have, I still do give anytime I hear any kind of a situation. But again, our inventory is kind of playing itself out. Also in the middle of that as well, we also made a cookbook.
Hmm.
I believe you designed the cover because one of the things that Kelsey also said in one of her writings was eat something worth tasting. And so we made a cookbook
Yep.
based on that idea, and that helped out pretty well. But again, I'll hear from women that say, I still use my Kelsey cookbook, so.
My wife does too. There's some good recipes in there. A lot of good
There,
cooks that we know. Yeah.
indeed.
That's an amazing legacy again that it was able to spawn scholarships and then other people were encouraged by what she said. I remember being at the funeral and looking around and like 400 people or so had the shirts on, but the people who we hadn't been able to reach yet or get a shirt, they had printed off little badges, made badges for themselves with the logo on it, and were wearing those. And I remember one, Deanna, you know who I'm talking about. Uh, she was going through cancer at the time. She had hers on, and you just know people are struggling, but she was able to touch so many people with her perspective. How did Kelsey's perspective help you and Teresa during this time?
That's a great question. For me, one of the biggest things that Kelsey influenced me in those ways is I can be the kind of a person who focuses on the negative. I don't like that about myself, and something that I work on, but I really can. So it's easy to get up every morning and to think about the fact that your daughter is dying. Is that, I mean, most likely she's not going to be around in a year. And it's easy to begin to think about all the things that, quote unquote, she's going to miss. But because of Kelsey's attitude and life is more interesting when you're happy, I kind of took that as a challenge, if you will, that I was going to make sure that the rest of her life, whatever it was going to be, was going to be happy. And so one of the things I really told myself, and I really tried to do, is I'm not going to focus today on Kelsey dying. I'm going to focus today on Kelsey living. And so
Hmm.
what can I do to help Kelsey live today? And part of that wasn't just how can I make today be a good day on this earth, but I also tried to think about how can I help her today make sure she appreciates what's coming for her? How can I
Hmm.
help her to appreciate that even though this physical life is coming to an end, that she has a spiritual life that will last forever? And so it wasn't just about let's go for the gusto today. There was some of that, but it was also, how can I make sure you appreciate today that God loves you?
Hmm. As you interacted with other people who received the shirts, how did it help them? You've kind of alluded to the one gentleman who had cancer that he couldn't he didn't want to be without the shirt on. But do you have any stories you can share beyond that? How it helped them emotionally?
I can't really think of any specifics right off the cuff, but I do remember there being like this general idea. We always share the story, when we would include a little pamphlet
Hmm.
with the box of shirts that kind of told Kelsey's story. And we had a website at that time that would you could go to and read even more about her story. And I can remember people saying, "Hey, if that little girl can be happy with her diagnosis, then I can be happy with my diagnosis." And I do actually remember telling somebody one time, "Look, Kelsey did not view herself as somebody with a diagnosis, so
Hmm.
don't be your diagnosis, be what you want to be, even though you have this diagnosis." And so I did hear that from time to time, if this young lady, if this little girl, people might say, can be happy in the midst of this, then so can I.
I began this episode with the ideas that adoptive parents have to be okay, even if their kids aren't. And I want to try to circle back now and just take Kelsey's perspective and apply it with scripture. And there was a few scriptures that came to mind for me is Philippians 4:6-8, where, Paul tells the church in Philippi, think on these things. To me, that's what she was doing. She was thinking on things that made her happy. And one of them was her faith. And as you said, you tried to help her focus on her faith as she was going through this struggle. So, that's one thing that we can take from her. There was another thing, a couple other verses that came to mind for me was that in Hebrews 11:4 talks about Abel, that he still speaks, and I believe your daughter is still speaking to us today through her example, how she persevered through the struggles she went through. So I know you miss her. I know you said at the time after she passed, you don't want her back.
That's
You know,
right.
she's in a better place. But just to know that she's still speaking today, and she would be 32, that's an amazing testimony to her and to you and as a dad too. And then I thought of another passage, Mark 14, where Jesus is talking about Mary and says, when we talk about what she did, where the gospel's preached, her story's still there. And Kelsey's story is still there too. So all those things really, play into her legacy and how she has impacted so many people before she passed and after she's passed. And I'm hoping people who hear this story on the podcast for the first time will be impacted and be able to take away some things that they can use to get through the storms we go through in life. So
Indeed.
I want to thank you for being here and sharing her story. I know at the time I said, I don't know if it was too hard for you to share it, but you said, no, I'd be happy to talk about it. And so one other thing I wanted to ask you, and I know the answer to this question, but I want you just to share it. What do you celebrate in honor of her every year? It's something pretty cool.
Yeah. So we call it Happy Day. And
Hmm.
so when we were younger, we didn't have a lot of money. And so on our kid's birthday, we would allow them to eat whatever meal they wanted. And so they got to pick the meal for that time. Kelsey always picked the same meal, fried pork tenderloin, mashed potatoes and gravy, green beans, and red velvet cake for dessert. And so ever since then, so we've had 16. We had 16 birthdays, and now we've had 16 happy days. So we don't always do it exactly on March the 9th, but we also didn't always do celebrate her birthday on March the 9th, but always really close to March the 9th, we have what we call Happy Day, where we eat that same food and we invite friends over. And sometimes we try to invite friends that we know that will have a connection to it. We have a
Hmm.
sister here who she is a Nigerian, and her son was actually murdered in Nigeria probably 20 years ago. And so we've had her come with us to enjoy Happy Day, and we celebrate the joy that Kelsey brought us that day. We do not do anything special to commemorate the day that she passed. My wife and I will usually say something about it to each other, and we'll pray about it. But Happy Day is exactly what it is. It's a day to remember the joy and happiness that Kelsey brought to our lives.
It's another good example of how you can choose to focus on the positive things, the things that make you happy, and remembering her that way is a good testimony for her legacy too. So, thank you so much, Simon, for being on here. This story still inspires me. I'm sure it will inspire other people.
I sure hope so. Thank you very much. It is helpful for me to tell the story more. So,
Well, and you have the hope of a reunion one day, and that's the
amen.
that's the main thing we all are looking forward to, and we can tell her, hey, guess what you did? Look
That's
what you
right.
did.
I know we're wrapping up, but I'll tell you, I never say we lost a daughter because
Hmm.
something is only lost when you don't know where it is. And I know exactly where she is. So
Right.
she's not lost.
That's so true. So true. So again, thank you so much for being on here.
Thank you for having me.
Before we close, I want to share one last story about Kelsey. After her funeral, Simon and Teresa asked if they could use the t-shirt design on Kelsey's gravestone. I was honored to say yes. Seeing that design there is a quiet reminder that even a short life can leave a lasting impact, that one perspective continues to touch hearts long after someone is gone. Kelsey's life reminds us that life is more interesting when we choose happiness, and I hope her outlook inspires you to carry that perspective in your life. If you'd like to see a photo of the shirt and the gravestone, you'll find a link in the show notes. That's all for this episode. I want to thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, this is Tim, encouraging you to do what you can now. I hope today's episode encouraged you to face the storms in your parenting journey with courage and confidence. If so, would you please share this episode with another adoptive parent? It would also bless me and the mission of this podcast if you would take a couple of minutes and leave a review for the show on Apple Podcast. Until next time, this is Tim, encouraging you to do what you can now.